This is the evolution of the Nintendo Game Boy. Starting off with the first Nintendo Game Boy. This was basically released about 9 years after the Game & Watch, which only had one game, and basically the person who originally made the Game Boy thought to himself, hey, the Game & Watch only has one game, and people are complaining about it. Why not make a system that you could change the games out of and be able to play them? So he came out with the Game Boy, and this thing is a brick. I mean, this thing compared to every other system now, it's a brick. It took 4 AA batteries to charge, had about 35-hour battery life on it. Cartridges were about the size of like this, and basically had this AC cable to where you could charge it up with rechargeable batteries. There's the contrast, volume, and also the accessory part, like the cable to basically make sure it's able to trade. They have to use, and yeah, this thing was released in 1989, and it was really good. It sold 118 million different models, and it was a pretty good system that they made. Probably, I think it is the best-selling Nintendo system that they have, which is pretty good for something that was the size of this. And the thing is that Atari and Sega at the time had backlit screens and were really good at the time, and this thing still outsold them. The Sega only had 52 million sold, and the Atari had about 55, and basically this thing outsold it all, even though it didn't have a backlit screen, and also it took 4 AA batteries, while the other ones had backlit screens, colored screens, but the Sega and the Atari, they both took 5 AA batteries to basically work, and also they had to be new batteries put into the system every 5 hours, or 3 hours. And this thing, with the battery life, they just blew them out of the storm. Also with the games too, you got some amazing games for the Game Boy. You got Pokemon Blue, which is what I'm playing at the moment. You have some other cool ones, like over here. If I can grab them real quick. Got some other cool games, like Mortal Kombat, Tetris. The game this is the game that actually came with the system, where if you got the system whenever it first was released, you got this inside of the box with the accessories. Castlevania Adventure, best Castlevania game in my opinion. Also you got Zelda Link's Awakening, really good Zelda game. You also try it out if you don't have a Game Boy. Uno, and also another fan favorite, Pokemon Yellow. And yeah, there was also some other ones like Pokemon Gold. You could also play that on here, but it just won't be in color, which is kind of disappointing. I think I actually have it somewhere around here. Yeah, here it is, Pokemon Gold, right here. So there are some pretty good games for this system, and it was really good too. I think it actually was about almost $1 billion it made off of the games alone, and that's really impressive for something like this, the Game Boy, that was released in 1989. For them to do that after the Game & Watch, and the reason why is because you could actually change out the games of this. Like, say like, oh, I got bored of Pokemon Blue. Oh, what do I want to play? Pokemon Gold. Just go ahead, blow into the cartridge, blow into the system, obviously. Insert it, bada bing, bada boom, play it. And it was just a range of games also that made it really good. because there was a lot of games, like different games for different categories. You got Street Fighter, Street Fighter 2, the Pokemon genre, Uno, all the other games I just showed y'all, and way more like Kirby Dreamland, Kirby Pinball. So many awesome games for this one little system with a puke green DMG dot matrix system. Just crazy. It's just awesome. And also, you had to buy specific things to see it to see the screen in the dark. So let me go ahead and get one of those things. One of them is actually this. Basically, put four AA batteries in it, and you put it onto the system, and it would light it up. So I could go ahead and try to put it on for y'all, but it'll be a bit difficult. And there you go. It does make the Game Boy a bit heavier, but I mean, that's not really a big deal. Whoa. When you're able to see it in the dark, which is pretty good. That's one of the only ways you can see it in the dark. Also with the lights that had magnifying glasses, and also the ones that were just a light that hung over with like a protective screen over it, which was really good as well. And that's it, 1989. Let's go ahead and go into the newest revision. Soon after the Game Boy, people were complaining of how thick it was and how big it was. They were thinking, what about people with jean pockets? What about people with smaller pockets? What about like little kids? Well, we got something for y'all. Roll the clip. Wow, that is a difference in size, definitely. This thing is the Game Boy Pocket, or basically, as I like to call it, the Game Boy Small. Basically, it's just a smaller version of the Nintendo Game Boy. Here's a little comparison for y'all. So, the height is different by 1 inch, and the thickness is different by about half an inch or 2 inches, around there. And it is really, really different in length. Some of the stuff is different, like the AC port to charge it with rechargeable batteries. It's way smaller than the one on the Game Boy right here. And then headphone jack is still the same, obviously, right there. It's actually swapped on the sides, so the part for the cable so you could trade on Pokemon is right here. Volume's right here, and the contrast is right here for different lighting conditions. Also, this was also used for light. Like, there was a accessory, it's called a worm light. You plugged it in here, and it would go above the screen, and you would put it to where you want it, and then you could see the screen in nighttime, which at the time, which at the time was pretty good, and no one really cared about it because they thought they could use the Game Boy thing with it, but really you actually can't, in a way. If you were able to, if you tried, it would just slip off. There's no way of putting it on there because it's less thick than the actual Game Boy. Because that's why there's no light accessory except for that one for the Game Boy. Because the Game Boy was so big at the time that you really couldn't find nothing, and that was a bit weird. There's obviously the same buttons, down, down, left, left, right, right, up, up. Select start on both of them, B and A on both of them, and yeah, the only thing different was it just said pocket right here, and the speaker was a bit quieter, I'm pretty sure. Let's go ahead and give it a test run see if the speaker. Let's go. Game Boy original first. Versus Game Boy Pocket. The Game Boy Pocket's a bit quieter, but obviously that's because it's a smaller system and a smaller speaker, which ain't really that bad. Also, things with the Game Boy Pocket, instead of having the pea green or puke green screen, it actually gives a black and white screen, which was more clear to see and a better screen overall, which was pretty good. Also, the Game Boy Pocket did come in different colors like green, pink, blue, black, red, and of course, regular color. And also, the Game Boy Color did. They had the Play Aloud series right before this thing in 95, where it came in black, red, pink, blue, brown, yellow, and just a regular, which is pretty neat at the time for people who wanted a Game Boy that was in a different color. This one, instead of taking, surprisingly, as this one, the Game Boy, flop this off, 4 AA's. This one, right here, surprisingly, flip this off, only took 2 AA's. So it was less of a hassle trying to find batteries, and it also is around the same, half the battery life of the original Game Boy almost. This is 35, and this is actually 20 hours of battery life, which is really good. But if you have a warm light plugged in, then it's around 15 hours. So for a warm light, if you're playing at night, it's going to be 15 hours, which no one's going to be playing during the nighttime for 15 hours straight. The night's not even 15 hours long. So, yeah. Basically, it was just a way to be able to have a smaller Game Boy and just a way to look more sleek. And, yeah, it obviously played the same games as a Game Boy. Played the same ones. You see, I just put the same Pokemon game from this one into this one. And it still runs perfectly. Fits perfectly. And, yeah, that's about it. It took AAA's. The only differences are it took AAA's instead of 4 AA's, 2 of them. Speakers were smaller. It was actually a bit slimmer and better to fit in smaller pockets. And it played the exact same games. That's about it for the Game Boy Pocket. Now, people were thinking, you know what? We need something that we could see at night. We need something that's not going to leave us in the darkness. So, let's get ready for this Japan exclusive. Roll the clip. As y'all saw in that last clip, or last 2 clips, there are actually 2 different modes for this thing. There is the, obviously, regular brightness mode for during the day, or if you're playing during the nighttime, there's actually a light. This Game Boy is the Game Boy Light. It was a Japan exclusive, only released in Japan, and is still hard to get. They normally go for around $200 to $350. Luckily, I found mine for $190, so I kind of only $10 off, but it's better than paying $200. I mean, it's not really a difference. But the Game Boy Light was a pretty odd system. They kind of just left us in the dark over here in the U.S. by just not giving this to us. They only sold it in Japan, which was kind of a weird move for Nintendo. But with this thing, it is able to play it during the nighttime. Also, if you only had the original Game Boy, but you don't need it no more, you need to play in the nighttime without having to use an accessory, and you only have AA's, well, when you remove this, it takes 2 AA's to play a Game Boy Light, which is really cool. That it only takes 2 AA's instead of the Game Boy taking 4, Game Boy Pocket taking 2 AA's, now this taking 2 AA's. Really weird. The only difference in this and the Game Boy Pocket is this one's a bit bigger. The back part where the batteries are is lumpy. And that's about it. Speaker's still the same. Buttons are still the same. This says light instead of pocket. And up here it also says off, ... on, and then light for the light mode, for the different modes. There's off, then there's on, then there's light. Which is really cool, the fact that this actually does have a light mode, so you can see it in the dark. Imagine if they would have released this thing in the US and how much money Nintendo would have made. But I think they really actually did a good job, because people wouldn't have bought the newer models if it wasn't for this. But that's pretty much the only difference with the Game Boy Light. It was released in 1998, and it was released early 1998. And basically, it was just a weird curveball for Nintendo to throw at the US. But, I mean, people in Japan were happy, so that's at least something. So, a few months after this, Nintendo were just thinking, you know what, we need to make something new. Something amazing, something colorful. So, ladies and gentlemen, roll the clip. This here is the Game Boy Color. It may look a bit red on y'all's end, but it's actually pink, or rose pink, or reddish pink, whatever it is. But basically, the Game Boy Color was released a few months after the Game Boy Light. Basically, it was released a few months after it, so probably mid to late 1998. They decided to go without a colored screen for some reason, but it was colorful. It was a colorful screen. So basically, it did have its own games. It had Game Boy Color games, which this ain't one, but there are actual Game Boy Color games that you can find at stores. And you could only play them on the Game Boy Color. You can also still play original Game Boy games on this thing, which is surprising. Buttons are still the same. They just feel different than the other ones. Speakers a bit bigger than the Game Boy Pocket and Lights. Screen smaller than the Pocket and the Light. And this says color right there. Also, the battery power indicators back on the system, as you can see. This system also took 2 AA's, just like the Game Boy Light. And it came in a variety of colors, as y'all can see. Kind of a rose-ish color. This is what I have right now. A grape, lime, banana, and blueberry, which is actually the names of the colors. Instead of like pink, purple, green, yellow, blue, they were rose, grape, lime, banana, and blueberry, which is very odd. This thing was released mainly because there wasn't any color in the games, so they decided to change it up a bit, but they removed the kind of light sequence the Game Boy Light had, which was very odd, honestly, for their decision making. But it was very, very smart in a way. I'm not really sure how, but you'll probably understand why. But there's nothing really to the Game Boy Color. It's its own system. It has its own games. It ran on 2 AA's just like the other one. Smaller screen, different design with the curve, everything. But it has everything the same as the other ones. It don't have a contrast mode because Nintendo was like, you know what, we already got a good screen. So, after this, Nintendo were thinking, where do we go with our Game Boy line? Like, what do we do? There's nothing really to do. And then one man thought, you know what? Opposite. What? Instead of amazing and colorful, why not advanced and technologically advanced? Why not, instead of vertical, it was horizontal? Let's make it different. Roll the clip. As you saw, that is very different than the other models. Welcome to the Advanced line. This is the Game Boy Advance, and boy was it different. It had a horizontal feature instead of a vertical, and it was very different in a way. It also used 2 AA's, just like the other ones, and it also had its own different games, which the games for this thing were actually only about half the size of the original Nintendo Game Boy games. Here is a Game Boy Advance game compared to a Game Boy game, half of its size, which was very weird at the time, because it was a Game Boy game with more technology and more data put into a smaller kind of cartridge, which was weird at the time. And the Game Boy Advance had its own cartridges, as y'all can see, and it had some really good games. Like, it had Pokemon Sapphire and Ruby, Super Mario Bros. 3, a remake of it, Pac-Man World, Super Mario Brothers Classic NES series, and so much more. It was really good at the time, and basically, it was a huge sell. But the only thing was, guess what? No lit screen. You still couldn't see it in the dark. You had to get the right angle, the right window, the right lighting, everything perfectly as if you were shooting a photography photo just to play one level of a game or anything. Or just a full game. It was very difficult. But this thing was really odd because of how different it was. Like the shape of it. It had L and R buttons at the top here. The games would go in right there. As y'all know, this was the first Game Boy I ever made a review on. Y'all can go check that out about a year or two ago. This is the trading cable port and worm light port. Also, you could put like different keychains and stuff right there. And also somewhere else right here is where you can put like an X strap or something. But the buttons felt a bit different. They were odd feeling. The speaker was just like the original Game Boys, but instead of like this, they were like this. So it was a bit odd. Also, the power thing, if it has a good amount of charge and it's almost full, or if it's a full charge, it's green. But if it's low on battery, it'll go to either, I don't know if there's a yellow option, but I think it just goes straight to red if it's low battery, which is pretty good instead of just having to have a red light and just depending on if it means good or bad, which is really good. Battery compartment's a bit different. It's like that. And that's basically it for the Game Boy Advance, really. It was released in 2001. So 3 years after the Game Boy Color. So that's something. It was just a bit odd at the time having to play like this instead of like how you would play like this with the Game Boy. So that's it for the Game Boy Advance. And they were thinking, you know what? Let's actually make everybody happy for once. You know what? We need light. We need color. We need advanced. So they decided to create this. Roll the clip. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, it is here. The Game Boy Advance SP. Probably what everybody seems to think is the best Nintendo Game Boy. Which, I mean, it's a very odd opinion of them. But I'm kind of biased. I like the original one more. But the thing is, the reason why people think this is the best one is, here we go. The screen is protected because it flips open and shut like a Game & Watch from back then, the dual-sided. And also like DS's and 3DS's today, which is pretty cool. Have the screen right here. They were tactile instead of rubber buttons, so they were a bit louder and a bit different to push. There's this button right here that is also to turn on and off the light. Speakers right here in your face. And it was pretty good. I think I've dropped this from like a 5'5" dropping distance while playing this thing, and it's still in good condition. And the back looked like this. If you wanted a new rechargeable battery to put in there, then go ahead and unscrew those, put it in there. Games went in right here, so all you had to do, if you wanted to play your game, insert it in there, open it. Also, if you didn't want to play with the light on at night and it was too bright outside, then all you had to do is just turn off the light like that, and you're good. Because there is a button, and the button was basically this. Just click it if you want it on, or off, and if you want it back on, click it on. This is a 001, I'm pretty sure. Let's check here. You'll see right around here. 001. So basically, there are two different models. There's a 001 and a 101. 101 had a backlit light, and this one has a front lit light. Which means that the backlit ones are just like our phones today, but the frontlit ones are kind of like the first DS in a way. So that's how it is. This Game Boy, people say, is the best one because it has a rechargeable battery right there, as you can see. And it still has the same Game Boy Advance ports for, like, trading, which is really neat in a way. I really like it, but in my opinion, it's just not the best. But for everyone, it is. So I guess go watch everyone else's videos for it to see which one you think you like more. But they were also thinking, you know what? Because before this next one that I'm about to show you, after this one, Nintendo made a Nintendo DS and released it, which actually was a very weird move for them. They called it a third pillar to their handheld business. And so basically, they made a new system called the Nintendo DS, which was this originally, right here. After this was released, they were like, you know what? Let's put an end to this whole Game Boy thing. Let's do something smaller, something very weird that people may not have good opinions on. So, let's go ahead and roll the clip. As y'all saw, that is a weird looking Game Boy. Welcome, Game Boy Micro. This thing was the last Game Boy and the worst Game Boy in everyone's opinion. Everyone thinks, oh, it's the worst. Screen's way too small. It's too small. Honestly, in my opinion, it's my second favorite Game Boy. But you can only play Game Boy Advance games. No Game Boy games. Can't do it. But for stuff like Game Boy Advance titles, easily take it out of your old Game Boy Advance, put it in here, slide it right there, sleek and flush, turn it on, and play. The volume slider is right here, and these are actually used for the brightness also. If you go right here and click one of these two buttons, hold it down and click up, you can go up or down on the brightness, which to give y'all a better look at the brightness difference. So that's it with all the way up backlight, and then down to front light for like them just whenever you want to play, and then I guess the backlight, the brighter one, is whenever you need it at nighttime and you can't see it at all. But this thing is really small, and literally to show you that it's small, the speaker is 3 things only, and the buttons are lowercase than the letters just because it's micro. This is the charging cable I use, and yeah, that's about it. I had a headphone jack, power swap right here, turn it on and off. Also, these things do light up too. If they're blue, it means it has good battery. If they start to flash red, then it means low battery. And then it'll continuously flash it multiple times in case you need to charge it. And there are you guys right there. As y'all can see, you guys. Anyways, but that's about it. It only sold 2 million units because of how bad it was, supposedly. Some of the reasons that some of the other creators said it was their least favorite is because, oh, you can only play Game Boy Advance games on it. And, oh, it's too small. Oh, it's It's yada yada yada. It's not, nothing's bad in my opinion. Nothing's bad. It's just, sorry about that, you guys. It's just a smaller version of like a Game Boy. You just go ahead and play your games, Pokemon games, any games. You turn it off, slide it into your pocket. It's literally smaller than my phone. It's smaller than my wallet. Literally. How many Game Boy Advance games is this? How many does it take? Two Game Boy Advance games is how long this thing is. It's not long, but it's not short. It's not bad. I'm just gonna say that it is not bad, in my opinion. Like, no one complained about the Pokemon Mini, and it sold 100 million units. There's no bad thing said about it. But this thing got so much hate and only sold 2 million units. Like, what? Like, what if there's just someone that only likes Game Boy Advance games and wants a smaller system to just plop them into and play them, like, with a good screen? That's what I use this for Game Boy Advance games, and I use my Game Boy original for Game Boy games. But there's obviously going to be someone that wants to play all of the games, and that's why everyone chooses this as their favorite. So, yeah, Game Boy Micro was the least favorited one of them all, but one of my favorite ones. So, that's the Game Boy Micro. So, let's go ahead and cut to the next thing. So that was a talk on all the Game Boys, which these are all of them. Original Game Boy, 1989. Game Boy Pocket, 96. Game Boy Light, 98, early. Game Boy Color, late 98. Game Boy Advance, 2001. Game Boy Advance SP, 2002/2003 for the 101 models. And also Game Boy Micro. My two favorite are original Game Boy and Game Boy Micro. And yeah, that's about it. All of these are the US ones except for this. This is only in Japan. So you gotta pay a pretty penny for this if you want this. But for the other ones, not so much. This one was also 200, but it's because it only sold 2 million units, so not that many people have them. But that's about it. Thank you for watching the video. Hopefully y'all enjoyed it. Go watch my other ones if y'all did enjoy it. And let me know if y'all want more Game Boy content or more newer stuff content, like newer systems or unboxings. So without ado, my name's Hunter, and I'm out. Peace.